Good morning, everyone. We've just invited you to post your name, where you are, and what the weather is doing today in the chat. So this is a nice way to connect our physical bodies into our digital photos here. It's lovely to see you all. How's everyone doing? Maybe also pick an emoji just to describe. You can pick one of, there's only 5 emojis there, but you can click the 3 dots and be a bit creative if you like. Excellent. Leon is wearing sunglasses. Good morning, good morning. Wow, what a few days we've had together. This is day 3 and our last day together. Over the last 2 days, you have heard from 62 speakers in the project level sessions. Big round of applause to all of our project level sessions over the first 2 days. In total, we've heard from 62 different people speaking. So by the end of today, 82 will be here, have heard from 90 people by the end of today. So really big thank you to all the people who are involved in today. It's been very incredible to bring so many people from the network together. So thank you for that. We've also heard from our fearless leaders from the hubs, Poonam and Amir from India, Dan and Michael from Rwanda, Amal from Somalia, Somaliland, and Hala, Gary, and Gamu from South Africa. So we'll be very much looking forward to digging more deeply into what you've shared with us. So thank you so much for that. And for now, I'd like to introduce Hala, who's going to give our introduction to day 3 of the conference. So big round of applause to Hala. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie, and good morning to everybody. And yes, how do you capture and carry what happened yesterday into today? So it took me a long time to work that out, and in the middle of the night I decided I would wake up and write a tiny text. So that's what I've done. And I wanted to just acknowledge that yesterday Poonam did such a brilliant job of summarizing the deeply political context of our work and the dynamics of the educational and social changes that are emerging and that are necessary. And I think that every single project in TESF has done this work with bravery, with focus, and with transgressive movement. So there's not much more that I can say about that. So I wanted to turn our attention this morning to the kind of research that we are doing, and particularly the question of sharing the knowledge that we have been co-creating with others. And I want to do this through a tiny text, which, as I said, I wrote early this morning. And this tiny text was inspired by your work and your words yesterday. So if you hear yourself in the tiny text, thank you. So the title of this piece is Rewriting Research with Spoken Music, Image, and Story. And the story goes like this. Once upon a time, people thought that the best and only way to share research was as academic text, and that only this form would offer a valid representation of the world as constructed in and through research practice, and that when disseminated, it would have an impact on the world. But then we thought that such texts, while bearing witness in important ways, don't give real clues to the artistry involved in our research, often leaving us with dehydrated voices and at worst, commodified knowledge that fails to reach those we are doing our research with. So what we did was we created oral and visual literatures in and of our work. And these were rooted in time and place, and with the people, the rivers, the land, and the cityscapes, the gardens, the trees, and the communities who are speaking with us. We were not trying to give voice because we found that people had voice. We were not trying to develop agency because we found that people had agency. Instead, what we wanted to do was to find and articulate forms of expression, voicing, and meaning-making that could amplify voice and agency in the seeded relational movements for transforming education for sustainable futures that we were co-creating in our projects, communities, cities, gardens, kitchens, classrooms, hubs, and countries, crafting richly textured stories of this work that reflects its originating ethos. And what we found was that we could work with echoes, reflections, resonances, provocations, patterns, and connections. We found new capacity for meaning making and its subtleties, This offered us a more vivid, profound understanding of reality, reducing our dependence on a singular mode. We found that reaching for the arts and our own artistry, the artistry in children's drawings and in photographs, film, recipes, stories, writings, dance movements, gardening practice, and more, helped us to cultivate the imagination, giving us spaces for experimentation, for trying out that which was not yet there. This, in turn, allowed languages, experiences, and voices previously marginalized to rise into the teaching and learning architecture of education. We were able to, through poetry, song, image, and movement, reveal complex and hidden realities and make bread and poetry together by the fire. In doing this, we could place hopeful words in our hearts to guide the kinds of possibilities that we need to bring into reality. We found that it eased pain, that it challenged complicities, and it germinated possibilities, giving us the courage to relentlessly turn up to fight oppression. We also found new power in these ways of rewriting research. Photography became a civic refuge and a tool to transform the law, providing a means of bringing to light important concerns from people which they cannot put into words. We found different ways of using time, being in time, and taking time to just be, in the present sense of being present. We were able to build allyship, creating melting pots of beautiful knowledge, value the wisdoms and innocence in intergenerational knowledge platforms, and reframe the ethical foundations of research. We found that grassroots men and women were theoretical if given the space, and that research as a process can be transformational when it is also an activist process. We found that meetings under trees and WhatsApp groups could be organic learning platforms, and that spaces for knowledge co-creation were often found in between. We were able to center our lived realities and that which lives in children's drawings and stories. We were able to tackle the polyscapes, creating new registers of coming, longing, belonging, transforming, doing, and undoing, raising not only the ethics of care, but the politics of an ethics of care, and through this, building those bridges. We found that pictures or poems can tell a story or represent an image and be rigorously abstract at the same time, or in some sense, absolutely musical, bringing forms of human and more than human artistry and solidarity into the lexicon of what counts as valid research. We realized that our story is not a solid object or a solitary entity, but a transformative relationship. Our stories, whether contemporary, historical, shocking, gentle, timeless, or temporal, never exist in isolation. They are linked to other stories, forming a timeless or temporal web, connecting our humanity across times and places. Our poems and images gave depth, radical co-presence, and transhumanity that includes the earth and her people in the relational struggles that we were showing up for. Our poems, images, and stories, like the food we have grown and cooked together, are both familiar and one of a kind. They are all something new and locally flavored, and they are also part of a whole forest of themes and variations, echoes and connections, spreading out through space and time. We did all of this because we wanted to find authentic, accessible, and interesting ways of sharing our research and to give real meaning to knowledge democracy. Each story, image, and poem, each project report, each song, each one is a piece of work. It is also part of a larger story, a fabric of life that is torn and patched, woven and unwoven, day after day, night after night, image after image, and sentence after sentence. Our stories do not and will not rest. And this, we think, may change the way that we think about or do educational research and co-learning work, and how we can co-produce the freedoms and solidarities for our common futures. It seems to me, as shown in our conference so far, that the eruption of creativity, artistry, and solidarity that is found in all of our work is and must be not only at the core of transforming education for sustainable futures, but also a feature of how we share this work going forward. So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you especially to all of those whose words I was able to bring into the story this morning. So thank you so much. Thank you, Rosie.
Wow. Thank you, Hala, for a beautiful summary of what the TESF is all about. If you can please share that with us, if you haven't handwritten it today. I feel like I want to print it and go and sit under a tree this afternoon to read through that again. So thank you so much, Hala.
Thanks so much for this sharing. I had a question, and maybe I completely missed something in the way that knowledge co-creation was described through that original definition as specifically relating to research. That surprised me, and I wondered whether that is something that is why it was described specifically in relation to research when it's very much through our experiences and through the way it's described when we're speaking much more, something that is possible across the whole learning landscape, across institutions and out, in daily life. So I'd just love to hear a little bit where that came from and whether that's shifting or whether that, I didn't quite understand that, and I just
I'll start off and then maybe ask Leon to come in. I mean, I think that one of the good things about now is looking back at that, the purpose of that background paper was maybe as a guide for projects who were going to be entering the putting in proposals to be part of the network. So it was written at a very specific time in the process, but I think is linked with research, but also the wider ideas of transforming education. But Leon, do you want to respond a bit more to Bridget?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think Bridget, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that the real value of our projects actually were that they were mainly action oriented. All of them were to do with changing, weren't primarily necessarily to do with research. The research was really about recording the processes of the wider processes of change, which were co-created, as you say. So that's a really strong, really good point. Thank you. Yeah, well, I think we need to consider that as in the way that we express what we've been doing. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Could I add one thing just briefly?
Mm-hmm.
I asked it specifically in relation to another project I'm involved in, where knowledge co-creation as a method in the classroom, to have a very open kind of way or plan in teaching, so that the knowledge is co-created, at the university level with the students in the classroom as a decolonial method also so that it's not necessarily research, but it builds a totally different way of thinking about learning within the classroom as well. Thank you.
That's really useful. Thank you. Leon, can I put Patrick's question to you as well? He's asking, what are the main synthesized themes for future research projects? And then I'll come to you, Priya, in a minute.
Well, I think, what we're creating over the last 2 days are really, I think, a really rich, fertile ground for future research. And, in that sense, it's a never-ending story. This is one point along a journey. And we hope that through the process of this legacy event and the global event, that we'll be able to catalyze further research and other co-creation activities arising from the wonderful work that people have been presenting.
Thank you. Priya, do you want to ask your question?
It was more just a comment. And forgive me if I wasn't paying careful enough attention and this was represented in the synthesis, but just talking to some of the other projects, I think an important part to represent in this kind of synthesis is the incredible impact of the TESF framing of research and how that has enabled all of the things that the synthesis is highlighting. Certainly in our project, it's been unbelievable how much more we could do because of the supportive framework of funding, the flexibility to speak to neglected, submersed, denigrated parts of the work, and to be held and supported in that. And I think that just needs to be represented as much as the work of the individual projects. I think that funding structure and the network structure is a big part of that. Thanks. I just wanted to add that.
That's fantastic. And you may find yourself being directly quoted, if that's okay. Raphael, I think that links closely with the work that you're doing on that kind of wider framing of partnerships and the structure of the network hubs and projects. Do you want to respond anything to Priya?
No, sorry, not specifically. Sorry, I feel put on the spot there. I was actually thinking about the previous point that Bridget was making about research, and but a more inclusive term that we sometimes have been using here is collaborative action and learning, I guess, and that's yeah, which I guess encompasses that.
Yeah,
sorry, I'm going to mute myself now.
Okay, but just to, if I might just respond briefly to Priya, and others might have thoughts about this too, but I think there's a lot that we need to look at in terms of the network structure and the way that things have been, that the projects have been scaffolded, some of which appears to have worked well, in the sense that it's facilitated the co-creation process, but also maybe other aspects haven't worked quite so well, and we're really interested to know about those too. But I do think that that point about making sure that the resource goes to the point where it's needed in terms of making a change is important, and that the scaffolding around capacity mobilization is there, that lots of the burden for things, the onerous stuff around research, really boring stuff around, well, it's not boring, it's hugely important, but the stuff around contracts and so on is really solid, and that basic scaffolding is there. And I must say that I think Joe and Camilla have done a great job in that, but also that the hub teams, I think, have provided a very important foundation, I think, in context, supportive, nurturing environment within each of the country contexts, which have each been distinctive. So I think, again, allowing the countries to adopt an approach that's appropriate for them. I mean, in the case of the Somali team, for example, I'll stop in a moment, but they adopted a particular approach to commissioning the research that reflected their particular needs. And I think all of the countries did that. India had to do that as well, given the legal challenges. So, allowing for flexibility at different levels of the network is important, but making sure that the resource, the basic resource and support is there, for the projects they can get on with it is important.
Yeah, thank you, Leon. I'm just going to respond quickly to John and then go to Vinola. And linked with what Leon was just saying, John's asking about the kind of managing expectations with projects, and I think this is really important, linked with that idea of co-creation in project design, and linked strong with those ideas of ethics, which we talked about as well. And we hope to unpack this in the kind of challenges section as well, of expecting people to put in unpaid work on project design when they're already in very challenging circumstances, and actually how this plays out, and the added demands which comes with expecting people to invest in a process which might or might not happen, or so yeah, we will explore that as well further, John, and please do feel free to contribute your ideas in that area. Vinola, I think we've got time for Vinola, and then I see Latif also for one last question. Vinola?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rona. Thank you for the lovely, amazing bringing together of all the voices of the 60 different voices and sounds and meanings that was shared. I think you did really well. Yeah, I would like us to do before we end this conference to actually deal with the question, where are we going from here, and instead of just saying, you know, it's going to be in till the end of the world, till the end of time. I think we should have four key things that we have consensus around, that we want to take forward, because I think we need to look at the accountability to the people that we have now exploding this possibility to. The people on the ground are excited, their world has been shaken, they can see transformation in front of them that they didn't see. They speak languages that they didn't have before. They can now see themselves as knowledge generators and creators, and they're ready to go to the next step. So we do not have billions and billions of pots of money, but what we can perhaps do, if we say there isn't funds, that shouldn't stop us, but because we have at least energy, that's a resource. What resources can we draw on? Can we have parallel exchanges with, for example, South Africa and Rwanda, India and Somalia, and so on, to begin to look at how can we do duplicate some of these projects that we had in the one area. How can we start a forest in another area, for example, and see how is it different, what conditions, and then in the end, for example, in 2 years, we can begin to look at common principles that work in different spaces, and what are the comparative specificities. I think that'll be a very rich way of using this knowledge, because we started the process. There's a lot of possibilities that came out of it, and now the pregnancy is now 8 months, and so it's going to be sad to abort this process at this very critical stage where we have created so much excitement. And so I don't think that we should have funding and those concrete things like, you know, administrative hiccups stop us. I think there must be some collaboration among the different areas, and I think it'll be great if it's coordinated, but not. I think the space should be opened up for countries and for the different hubs to start networking with each other as well. So I just want to say thank you, but I just want to make the point of also in co-creation. How are we now accountable?
To round off, Finola, so sorry to interrupt. I just want to get Latif as well. Are you able to put this into the?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. That's really important, and hopefully we'll cover some of that in the panel as well about those next steps. Thank you, Finola. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. No.
Latif, let's finish with you with your question or comment.
Good morning, all. Great to see you, and great to hear the great work that has been doing and great presentations. Just to respond to the point that Priya was making, there's a book chapter that myself, Eric, and Raphael will be looking to address these issues, not only what has worked, but also what hasn't worked. And I think Leon was pointing out some of the challenges, and I think he's absolutely right. We need to be looking at the challenges as well. But from where I sit, I think what has worked really well is the way the network structured was created and how it accommodated the challenges that we were encountering on the ground, whether that's bureaucracy, whether that's politics, or in some cases, security and violence. The hub was really responsive, and for us, we have not experienced that with other funders, and I think that's something worth noted. Some of the challenges included the ethics process, for example, a very much system driven by Bristol University doesn't necessarily translate to the work on the ground. So ethics has caused a lot of issues. I think contracting was handled really well by the team, Joe and Camila, and really very grateful to also Tara and Raphael and yourself, Runa, for helping out with all that. I would also say it's not only been what the teams have done together in terms of addressing the issues that were highlighted this morning. Also, new knowledges were found or created, such as the animal enclosures, the knowledge of in Puntland in Somalia, issues to do with influencing policy or writing journalists in language, indigenous language that was never done before in terms of reporting. So I will summarize this. But also, I would just say very quick, finally, the resourcing. I think the TESF's resourcing came at the time when the world was shutting down because of COVID. And those resources became a lifeline for many, many entities, including ours. So that's something to be celebrated. I will stop there. I think there's more value to be said than challenges.
Thank you so much, Latif. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. And back to you, Rosie.
Thank you. And a big round of applause. Thank you, Leon. Thank you, Rona. Thank you, Raphael, for all your deep thinking. I know you've been in lockdown for the last while. So yes, it was wonderful to hear what has come out of your kitchen.
We are heading to Musanze to visit Beransil and Bernard, a couple that has been married for over 20 years. 20 years of conflict and misery, but things have changed recently.
Nitwa Beransil, nkaba ntuye mu mudugudu wa Gacinyiro, umurenge wa Musanze, akagari ka Garuka.
Nitwa Bernard, hano mu mudugudu wa Gacinyiro, mu kagari ka Garuka, umurenge wa Musanze. Tubanye nabi cyane kubera ko nageraga mu rugo abana baba bakosheje babanze kwahira amatungo, nabakubita akabarengera bigatuma nanjye mukubita, ubwo tugahora mu makimbirane bigera aho abana bata n'amashuri, izo mpamvu bashaka kwigira ingegera.
Ubwo uri ari umuntu w'umusinzi, ubwo ntamenye inshingano ashinzwe mu rugo, gataha nijoro, ubwo mbese ntagira umwana umenya ko ari se, yabona abana babona araje bati muhore papa araje, none nimutahure turye papa atari yaza akabidutesha, ariko ubu ngubu bari kwifuza gusangira na se nta kibazo.
The capacity building process made a difference in their lives.
Duhugura uko tubana neza mu ngo zacu, tuguraga kubana neza nta gihe utoteza undi, nimba umuntu agukorera icyaha ngo nawe ugisimbuze ikindi, ari ryo tafari mwatwigishije ngo nimba umuntu atondetse itafari si ngombwa ngo ushireho rimwe.
Narahomye kubera ko uri kubona ko inzu ntabwo ihomye, ibihomye. Urabona ko nta gikoni mfite kiba ngifite, ubwo rero narahomye. Nishimira umunsi ni uko ibikorwa byose byagendaga nabi, ubu byagenze neza, tukaba dufatanyaga imirimo uko bikwiriye, tukajya inama ibyo tugomba gukora mu gihe mbere tutabihuzaga.
Ni byiza, byafunguye byinshi kandi bituma nza ku murongo, kumanja kumurongo ni inka sinayariraga ariko mwana nakukiza ndayahirira nuko mbese yahozaga ku ndoto rwa buri gihe rwa buri munsi kumva ko nanje nta kintu namara hano muri runo rugo sibwo nabaga ndi umuntu waraga nihebye nkumva ko ntacyo nashobora gukora ubwo kubera ko ntashimwe ampaga ubwo ariko kubw'ibyo mwaraduhuguye numva ko ibyo byose nakoraga bitari ibintu bizima ndavuga nti reka mpindukeho nanje nte kubera umugabo ikigeragezo ndebe ko hari icyo wenda nawe azahindukaho ariko icyanshimishije nuko nawe ari kuja arahinduka buhoro buhoro.
Bernard and Berancil represent many other couples that went through the same process to get rid of conflict.
xoolo dhaqato haddaanu nahay dhirtaanu jari jirnay xeryahan ka oodan jirnay waabaan ka dhisan jirnay dhulkii xaaluf uu noqday xoolihii maxay afka la aadaan bay waayeen كوما أودي هبر يعروف هذا مركو لجورة يغير كهذا أصحابيا ماشي وحلوفر إلى مركي للتجو وأنا يودي وهرية ما مدي يعروفتي كل غرية ما تجروا أول شيء ده يا عرور يا مقلب هو غرية ودم هبة وهرية وكذا اللي يسا وهرية يسا ما مدو إني أنا الرعاضة أنا الكنيسة عرورتها يسا حرام قول حلو
منك حوله يوراعه wixii dabadeeda uu raadsho wixii baadiyo ka dhumayo uu raadsho wixii saxanaha uu keeno gabadhuna waxay ku qaybsan tahay wixii macnaha waxa weeye de hoose iyo ilmihii iyo xaafadii iyo ilmaha xusiintiisii iyo waxayntiisii
waxaan reer miyiga hadaan reer miyi nahay cimilada isbedeshay adduunka waxyaabo badan oo saameynayna u keentay waxa kamid ah dhirtii oo yaraatay roobkii oo yaraaday asna waxaan u aanaynaynaa marka dhirta waa la jari jiray xeryaa laga oodan jiray reerku markuu guuro xeru degaya xerada waxay ka rabtaa inaa idii xero u oodid riyihiina xero u oodid waxarihi xero u oodid geel hadduu joogo xero u oodid ubadkiisa xero u oodid waa 5 xero waxaana dhirta laga jaraya dhirta laga jaro waa dhir xarana si bari xerada waxa kamid ah geedka la yiraahdo qansaxa quraca bilcilka
xerada markii la dhisayo dib tira badan baa laga maraa xanan bay leedahay geed baa loo soo goosanaya hangool la yiraahdo la isaga cisho lagu shuceeyo faas baa loo soo afaysanaya meelo fog baa laga soo jiidjiidaya dhulkii xaaluf uu noqday xoolihii maxay afka la aadaan bay waayeen
waxyeelada ka soo gaarta qofka bilow aadanka ooda waxa way waxa dhici karta ayadoo oo uu tuurta ku sido in dabayl ku dafiso waa la dhacaysaa waa ku xaganaysaa waxa kale oo dhici karta gudunta ku garaacaysid inay macnaha waxa weeye ama gacan ka haleesho ama lug ka haleesho ayaduna waa wax dhaca
in xiriyo dhagaxa la helo oo dhagax iyo sibir oo kale lagu dhiso waxa la heli karaa oo kale biro fudud oo la isgelgeliyo haddii aanu helo halka waa kamid
waxa lagu bedeli karaa fiistooyin la jaray iyo biro ayadoo aanu xeryaha ka dhiganno markaanu ka joojinno wataa dhirtii iyo dhulkii waa soo noqdeen wataa madow dushi waa noo baxday dhirtii insha Allah raxmadna ilaahay baan uga baryaynaa inay noo qabato
anigu haddaan helayo wax iiga fudud oo dhibta intaa tira la eg oo aan ka raaco oo iga soo raacdaa waxaan kaga fudaysta haddaan helayo waan u baahan
What we're going to do is I'm going to show the results of the open sessions. We actually had 14 nominations. We've condensed them down to 12, I think it is. So next slide, Nikki. We're about to launch the breakout rooms. So it's going to be pretty simple. All you have to do is just select a breakout room to go into. I'm going to leave a minute for this to be screen shared, and then Mickey's going to open the room. It's open format, open session. Please be mindful of hearing voices, deeply listening to each other's stories, making sure that there's some great engagement going around and trying to draw people's stories out. Please be aware of that. Enjoy the sessions. Please network. Please share your contact details. Wonderful. So I can't see when I'm screen sharing at the moment. Can we just pop some videos on? Wave hello, we're in our final hour together. Thanks everyone. I'm going to hand over to Leon today, who's going to be chairing our final session, Growing the Seed. How do we nurture our learnings into the future? A panel discussion. Thanks, Leon. I'm going to stop share.
Okay, thanks very much, Rosie. So I have the incredible privilege of introducing our panel for this final session. The panelists that we have are members of our fantastic advisory group, and we have other members of the advisory group here as well today. So hopefully they'll be able to join in with the discussion a bit later. But I think one of the real strengths of the network is that we've been able to draw on this remarkable expertise. So the purpose of this session is really to generate discussion around where we go next. So it's really to take up Vanola's challenge from earlier and to think about next steps and where we go from here. So we've invited 3 members of our exceptional advisory group to tackle these questions. And I'm going to ask each of them in turn just to give some thoughts around what they think are the 1 or 2 main takeaways from the last couple of days. I know that some of you I know that you've been extremely busy in some cases and traveling and dipping in and out of sessions, but all 3 of you, Arthur, Joan and Colleen, have been accompanying us along the journey and being very, very active at different stages of the network. So, you know, in answering that question, you can also reflect perhaps on your prior experiences and engagements with the network. So what are the 1 or 2 key takeaways from this legacy event for you? That's the first question. But the second question is, how do you see the understanding that's emerging from the network engaging or influencing or impacting on global debates? And each of you has different areas of expertise. So Arthur is a consultant ecologist. He's president of the International Environment Forum, but he's also worked for the United Nations Environment Programme, but done exceptional work on indicators and for measuring sustainable futures. So we'd be really interested in particular, Arthur, if you could reflect on how some of our learning might impact on those kinds of debates about how we monitor, evaluate sustainable futures. We also have Joan de Jager, who's a professor of international comparative education for the University of Minnesota, a long-time friend and colleague over many years. We share many similar research interests, but Joan's research has focused, amongst many other things, on sustainable livelihoods and youth agency. And we were wondering, Joan, whether you might think about how some of the learnings from this might relate to global debates in that field. And the third panelist, Colleen Virgil, is a professor at WITS. She's part of the sustainability unit at Center at WITS, and also active on the IPCC. So we're really, as a climate scientist, we were very interested to know your views, Colleen, about how some of these debates actually impact on some of the debates within the IPCC, but also around climate action and how we should be engaging with those audiences. And part of the motive for this is that in July, we'll be organizing a global legacy event where we hope to invite people from the wider international development community, as well as our participants and at the national level, to engage with our work. So it's important for us to know who we should invite into the room there. So part of the motive is also thinking about that. And if other colleagues in the meeting have ideas about who we should be engaging with and inviting, please do put those into the chat and let us know, because like I say, we do want to get the right people into the room. But then I'd also like to add an additional question, if I may, which is really in response to Vinola's challenge earlier, which is, from your perspectives, what are the one or two key things that we should be doing next as a network? All this wonderful work that's been going on, what can we do to take this forward in a meaningful way? All right, so I'll start off, if I may, with Arthur. So Arthur, in 3 to 5 minutes, please could you give us your thoughts on these questions? Nice, easy challenge there for you, Arthur.
That's a big challenge. You know, I've been thinking about this. It's such an amazing program. You know, you've learned so much, and it's all been founded in ethics and justice. And you've picked the most difficult countries in the world that have suffered the most to work in, and you've made amazing progress. And so, one, I was very briefly, I was struck by the things you struggled against. You have the power of the economy that ignores the kind of things you've been pushing for. You have the narrow neoliberal approach that you've been fighting against. So there's enormous inertia in the system, and you found ways to work around that and to make progress in spite of that. And then I think you've been so creative in where you've gone forward in terms of finding the balance between modern science and traditional and indigenous knowledge, both based on careful observation and that need to be equally valued and used together in achieving sustainability. You've done so much in the co-production of educational approaches involving communities in socially acceptable ways. The need to design education specifically for marginalized and discriminated groups for social justice. The new ethic of research, respecting and including those studied using safe language, intersectional approaches, the importance of diverse voices, the two-way learning that you've been going through, the very different requirements of education for life in cities and in rural areas. You can't have one approach that is good everywhere. The importance of grounding your sustainability education in an appreciation that we're all one human family on one planet. We have to consider everybody with dignity and respect, valuing our diversity as trustees for a natural heritage. So there's so much learning. I can't summarize. You already summarized a lot of it here. It's so impressive to see how different this has been from most research projects or development projects And the challenge, I think, is really taking, how do you capture this learning and taking it forward? So, you've done so much, but how to make it available to others? There's the experience you've had yourselves, and but capturing it in some ways that continued to go forward to be shared with others is probably your biggest challenge, because you can inspire people, but in what forms? You've got films, you do publications and so on. Is that enough? Are there specific audiences that need to hear what you've learned, that need to be targeted with delivery? The research community itself, educational authorities, policymakers, civil society organizations, bit of justice, donors. You've developed a whole set of processes on how to do this creative new kind of work together. But how do you describe and share those processes? What kind of integrated systems approaches are needed? Are there new ways of teaching this in teacher training, in schools, in decision makers and so on? There's so much you could be sharing, but how to do it is an enormous challenge. And also how to maintain the community you've built. You're a wonderful community. You've built across your countries with your academic partners. Maybe you need some kind of a newsletter, online sharing, conferences. What are the ways beyond the funding itself to keep the momentum going of what you built together? How can that somehow be perpetuated and the learning continue? Within each of your countries, how do you maintain the momentum within the country? How do you attract others to what you've done? How do you continue your learning and co-creation? How do you respond to the expectations you created with the communities you worked with? So I think there's always, you might say there's a national level in each country sort of saying, we built this wonderful network. How do we go further at the country level to give it the momentum and to not have it suddenly stop with the end of the project? And then, of course, other things that can be institutionalized, whether it be in the government, Ministry of Education, in civil society organizations, local communities. Are there some ways that you can build some structures to take forward some of what you've learned? So I think that's another challenge to sort of consider, are there partners that we brought in? Are there things we passed on to some structure or institution that will see this as part of their ongoing mission? And therefore, are there ways that you can ensure that, that everything doesn't end because the project is ending? And then I think there's some of the wider processes that are coming forward. Already this year, there's going to be the ministerial preparation on the 18th of September for the Summit of the Future. This big United Nations meeting in 2024 to look at the whole future of the global system. There's the Sustainable Development Summit coming at 1920 September, and you looked at sustainability. Do you have messages to communicate to that summit? And can you get them somehow on the table through some partners who are going to be active there? There's the whole process you asked about indicators and measuring. There's a whole thinking now about beyond GDP. How do we replace these economic measures, which turns everything into money, and therefore sort of institutionalized greed, whether it be individually or in corporations, and find other measures of human well-being, of natural well-being that are more science-based or experience-based and that can be used in communities. I've actually been working with a project the last year trying to imagine how do we develop other measures of the state of the environment, where we're doing on climate change and energy use, where we are doing with protecting our biodiversity. What about the release of pollution at the community level, not only the global level, but in our own communities? How do we look at eliminating poverty? How do we look at ensuring a sustainable food supply for everybody? How do we look at making sure that everybody has access to health? How do we see how we're managing our knowledge, our culture, our arts, our science in ways that are being both preserved and used and communicated to future generations? A whole educational dimension. How do we measure this in terms that they can say, oh, we're actually capturing something and using it, transmitting it? Then, of course, there's the whole dimension of what has traditionally been called work or employment, which needs to be broadened to look at all the different ways people can serve their society. The whole subsistence lifestyle that's not counted in the economy. I can remember seeing a study recently on Uganda where they said these fishermen were catching fish in their lakes. And so much creativity. This was sort of a footnote. Most fish were caught by women. That didn't count. That wasn't part of the economy. And so these biases built into the system. And then ultimately, you might say at the ultimate level, what about those values? You might say the spiritual dimension. How well are our values of ethics and justice being preserved and incorporated and used in our communities, in our countries, and going forward? So we need to rethink beyond GDP in all those dimensions and to find ways of indicating, measuring that and saying, this is what progress is, this is what well-being really is. And you've come so close to that in your research. I think finding ways of taking that forward, maybe with new research projects, but other kinds of partnerships would be very valuable to ensure that what you've done is preserved and taken on for the future. So those are my initial reflections. And I'm so glad to have been able to help in some small way this exciting project. Thank you.
Arthur, that's marvelous. Sorry, I lost my my unmute button for a moment there. Thanks so much for that. Really rich and thought-provoking and informative as well. You've given us some very tangible ideas about who we might engage with going forward. Much appreciated. Okay, may I now turn to Joan? Joan, I wonder if you'd be able to share your thoughts with us, please.
Sure. Thank you so much. And it's such a really an honor to have been part of this discussion the last few days, while in and out a bit, but also over the last few years and seeing the incredible work that's being done. And I've really enjoyed, thanks to Rona and to others before that, that I've been involved in some of the ongoing kind of synthesis work that was being done by the teams. So my reflections are kind of based on what I heard over the last few days, but also over the years. And I first want to acknowledge, I come to you from Melbourne, and I am at the University of Melbourne at present, which is on the unceded territory of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I want to acknowledge that, as well as that I come to you from the University of Minnesota, which is on the unceded territories of the Dakota peoples. And much of what you've been talking about today and over the past few days is the importance of Indigenous knowledges, but that are linked to land, to place, and to history. And so I think it's important for us to not only acknowledge that, but to recognize those knowledges that are in these places. I'm going to share my screen briefly because I made some notes last night after listening. And unlike Hela, mine are brief notes here for you to see. I felt like Hela's what did you call it? A little story, or your story captured so much of what we've been learning and hearing, and that really what I am doing is in some ways affirming as an outsider, in some ways as an advisory member, what you all have been talking about. So I'm going to be very brief, but critical insights, I divided these up according to the different pieces of TESF. So first about education, and I don't think I'm going to say a lot new here, but I want to communicate what I hear as somebody who works in education systems, transforming education systems, youth and youth livelihoods kind of work. What I hear are critical learnings from these projects that resonate in other places and that resonate with global issues as well. So in terms of critical insights from learning, I think what we learned was that learning is everywhere. Everywhere with everyone, everything. And that learning or education really is knowledge, but it's affect, it's values, it's action, and it's interaction. And there's, as Arthur pointed out too, there's the spiritual dimension that so many of you have noted in your work. It's embodied and it's enacted, it's not tested. And I was in one of the panels where the discussion was about how do we assess this sort of collaborative learning? And I think that that's a really critical question. It's not about testing, it's about enacting. And so in that regard, I think schools and schooling really must change. And we're talking about broader than schools, but particularly schools and schooling must change in our communities and larger system. And I'll come back to ways that I think your work can connect with some of the global discussion and dialogue about this. And Arthur referenced some of that with relation to the UN Summit on the Futures. With regard to transforming, what are the critical insights you all have revealed through your various projects about transforming? Well, that it is research and action, or activism, as many of you were talking about, that there is the need for, in order for transformation, there needs to be critical interaction that looks at convergences and divergence. So there was some beautiful discussion on the panels that where you actually looked at convergence of themes across each other's projects and talked to each other's projects, and yet you rooted them in the very specific contexts that were, different. So you could look for the divergence, but also find the convergent themes that you were learning from each other. This was well said by many others today already. It's about claiming space and agency, the agency that teachers already have, but being able to do some of these changes without having to work with scripted lessons, the agency that higher education institutions can have, for example, the agency that communities have. And it's about ecologies of knowledge that was well spoken to around both combinations of indigenous knowledge and more individualized forms of knowledges. So I think from that, we need to think about one kind of action point is how to do more critically engaged research practice or praxis in many spaces. And you're all doing that, but to continue to do that and to continue to spread the kind of knowledge and experiences that you've had in various networks that you're in locally as well as globally, and doing this kind of research praxis. I think the kinds of learning that we had about sustainability is that it is about ecosystems, that sustainability can't happen if we're not working across those systems, across levels and kinds of education, between kind of work, climate, health, and education issues, across communities, organizations, private sectors, and governments. I love to hear the panel discussion. I think it was a study in India where you were working with worker organizations to try and address how the first generation students from those families were able to succeed or not in higher education, or not succeed, but to be able, how they could best succeed through that. And it's about connections between urban, semi, and rural areas. And I know that we talked about that there's specificity in those urban and rural areas, and there's also connections between them. And we need to be able to look at that, not just the urban trying to understand the marginalized rural, or not vice versa trying to understand the marginalized urban, but to look at those connections between those spaces. Sustainability is also clearly about solidarities. You all demonstrate that well with finding spaces, finding common concerns, and about the political and social solidarities that you can build. And then finally, the learnings about futures. Future is that our past and future are in our present. And so I think what you've actually unearthed that, like how does our past inform our present, and how does the future turn up in our present? And how can we change what we're doing today, every day? It's about imagining and reimagining possibilities and looking for those spaces. It's about not necessarily singular or concrete futures, but rather looking at pathways and processes, rather than outcomes and measures of success, because there is no singular future. We're always adapting and being emergent, and there's collective learning and work in that area. So I think that means there needs to be, and you've exemplified this again, and the more that we can do this, more transdisciplinary networks. You all have created that, and I think we have to find spaces to continue to create that, and long-term projects. You've all noted the issues, the constraint of time. And I think we have to think more long-term while also thinking about the past in the present and the future in the present. Within the network, I want, in terms of just how to take things forward, I think continuing these collaborations across spaces and sectors, it's just been amazing to hear how you, from these different country sites and different communities and different sectors, can learn so much, learning from the cities group in the livelihoods group, looking for the common threads again within these different contexts. You've done blogs, you've done films, you've done engagements. I think you need to continue to do that and link with others. And I'm going to suggest a couple of linkages. One, I think, is maybe the Common Worlds Research Collective that does a lot of work that is quite similar to some of the work it's more focused on children, but it does a lot of work within the relationship of people and the earth and learning in those spaces. And then beyond the network, just today, I received this call for proposals from Spencer, which is a new funding initiative here in the United States that I think you all should maybe think about. They're doing both visionary kind of proposals and then actual grant funding around supporting transformative research projects. Sounds exactly like what you've been doing, designed to address systems for equity. So I would highly encourage you to consider that. It's a new initiative just announced. And I think also linking with the UNESCO's Futures of Education and the Futures and Innovation Group. There's a lot of work in common language and common learnings that have happened and that went into like the Futures of Education report. But I think that voices like all of yours aren't there yet in that platform in the same way that it could be. So contributing to their ideas lab, their blogs, or developing a webinar where all of you are sharing some of your ideas. That would be what I have to offer. Thank you. And again, thanks to all of your wonderful work.
That's marvelous, Joan. Thanks so much for sharing those fantastic ideas, really rich. Okay, we'll have a chance to ask questions of our panelists in a moment, but let me hand over now to Colleen. And we are slightly short of time, so Colleen, if I could ask you to try and be as concise as possible without diluting the value of what you want to tell us.
Thanks very much, and thank you to everyone for allowing me to be part of this. It's always difficult being the last person, but it's also nice because you can just say encore, encore, or ditto, ditto, ditto. So ditto on everything that has been said. But I just want to raise a couple of questions and issues quickly. I also agree that the project has been fantastic, and it's really been a rich project where you've reached out and really dug deep on some issues. So thank you very much. And I really hope that you can continue doing this. But I just want to preface everything that I'm going to say because of some of the work that I've been doing. Perhaps it sounds kind of kumbaya-ish, but I think we really need everything that we're saying kind of points to continue being humble and building that cooperative trust. We're all learning. And that's really what struck me in the Cape Town meeting, which, I mean, I've worked with a lot of different actors in actor spaces, but when those ladies got down, the Fisher folk, I think they were on the front and did their play where they said, we are activist researchers, and then we are researcher activists. And that really, I think, is something that we need to be pulling through from this project, because a lot of people are wanting to try and support that kind of work. Also, what I would suggest is trying to be clearly articulate what some of the practical learnings were, and I'm sure you've discussed this. Unfortunately, I couldn't join your discussions this week. Some of the personal learnings, because often we miss that, and it's really going to be in the personal realm, I think, where some of this has got to go forward, and then the political learnings. But more particularly, this is a long game. And there's a lot of money coming in now on climate change. There's a lot coming out with the different World Meteorological Organization, et cetera, et cetera. And so for me, I just want to point to a couple of things where I think you can imminently do some things and just add to the list. Unfortunately, it's a lot of work. But the World Meteorological Organization and everyone else is trying to really move into the implementation space in climate change, and in particular, a decade for action. So that's kind of everyone's mobilizing around now to try and move the next 10 years forward. And there are two big things that I really want to draw out for that, for you, or in fact, maybe let's make it 4, and I'll quickly get to those, Leon, so that we don't lose them. I think for me, the gap is that we're still not profiling with pride the lessons that we are learning in these processes from the South. We tend to start with the North and then kind of go to the South and then try and show, even in some ways, how we're catching up. And I actually think we've got to become more transgressive. I think that's the word that Hela and everyone uses, bolder, and really trying to not only talk about Indigenous local knowledge, which I think is critical, but also about tacit knowledge and local knowledge. So there's, I think, differences that we can articulate from this program that people out there in the climate science, maybe more positivist space, are latching onto, but they're kind of stopping at ILK. And I think it's a much richer discourse, which I think you've all drawn to. Number 2 is this big thing around transdisciplinarity. I've just come back from Stanford University where we had a meeting on transdisciplinarity. And really, to be honest, I think we're still surfacing. We're just doing the surface. We're kind of talking about dialoguing And it's not really about dialoguing. As we all know, it's about sharing knowledges and how those epistemologies are created. And I think there's a big space that you could bring in from all the work that you've been doing on this. So really urgent, I think, to start writing about this, pushing it out there much, much more furiously. And the last one is the way the climate scientists kind of currently speak is that we've got to get climate to the end user. So it's a thing that I've been trying to break down for the last 10 years in various platforms that I work on. And this notion that people are waiting with their hands, you know, as we throw stuff over the academic wall of universities and then they scramble off and go and do it, or the policies are waiting with open arms. And I think if we could shift that again, really making those connections right up front. And then finally, just to mention one of the big things that is happening at the moment, the biodiversity transformations assessment is ongoing. I'm part of that process, and there is very little literature. Honestly, we've been scouring the literature because a lot of this is emerging, and it would be fantastic if you all could start writing some of these papers that we could then thread through and push into the various channels that people are working on. But lastly, I think there must be lessons and synergies that you've learned now that you could collapse into. And you've heard about blogs and all different kinds of things, but not to forget the groups that I think are still marginal and not central sometimes. And those are the arts, the performative arts, the creative arts, different ways of trying to share this kind of knowledge, and particularly with the youth. So those are a couple of things. There's still the silos in climate, you know, early warning systems for all is a big thing that's now being pushed, that everyone, we leave no one behind, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think drawing from your work and really promoting what you've learned in a bold way from the South, I think is the final thing I'd want to say. And it's a long, long game. Some of us have been in this game for nearly 40 years and we can't give up. So thank you very much, Leon.
Thank you very much, Colleen, for those really inspiring and useful comments. And again, plenty of things to follow up there from your contribution. So much appreciated indeed. There have been some really good, we've got 10 minutes left. There have been some really thought-provoking comments in the chat. And I'd like to invite one or two people perhaps just to talk to the comments they put into the chat. So if I may start with you, Akpezi. Akpezi is one of our advisory group members as well. She's been very active in the network, and she's a Nigerian-based legal expert and environmental campaigner, formerly the head of the environmental education and training at UNEP. So Akpezi, I wonder if you have any thoughts, or if you'd like to talk to your comments in the text and any other brief thoughts you might have.
Yeah, I mean, hello, everyone. I'm so sorry that I have not been able to show my face because I'm recovering from surgery. You know, I had a domestic fall, broke my knees and some bones in my legs. So I'm joining this meeting from the recovery room, but it's been fantastic. And I just thinking about the future, because we've had a very great time together. I just saw that we've proved, you know, that when we embrace collaborative action learning, there is great good. There is great impact on the ground, and we need to bring these contributions to the solutions, the global solutions to the global issues we're looking at, you know, from biodiversity depletion to climate change, you know, even to peace, you know, and things like that. This kind of approach and this kind of learning will bring about solutions that last, solutions that embrace injustice, equity, you know, and those other issues that drop out from the present political solutions that are up there. So how do we do this? How do we ensure? I think some of the contributions that have been made point to the way forward. And we can't wait for maybe a pot of funding or so from somebody. No, we've all proved that those local projects we did are successful. And I remember when the projects were being analyzed and put together, there was this aspect of the proposal. So how would you carry your proposal forward? What are your sustainability plans? I think we would all have to go back, to those plans. We said that, okay, this is what and what and what. These are the steps we're going to do when the funding from, this project expire. This is how we're going to try locally to carry on with the project. This is how. So we need to go back and see what we have suggested and add to them the openings that have been suggested in this conference. The places we could apply, go to for funding. And we must not let this die, because we know that if we can bring the learnings from this meeting to the global level, to the national level, the solutions that will be applied to the global problems and also the national problems will be very impactful. So we have a responsibility here, all of us, to ensure that we take this to the next level at our different area of influence. So I want to just say thank you, to everyone. It's been exciting. This is one conference. It's not been boring. Other conferences you'll turn up, but this, something exciting is happening every moment. And I want to thank everyone. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Pezi. I can hear the round of applause, even if it's a virtual one, for that inspiring conclusion. Thank you. And again, thanks for the opportunity, the challenge of inviting us to think about taking it forward and further funding. And we've had some quite concrete suggestions about that. I'd like to ask my colleague Eric. Eric, if you're there, because you've put some really interesting thoughts in the chat. I wonder if you'd just like to share those briefly with us.
Yes, thank you, Leon. Thanks for the kind invitation, and it really builds on all of the really excellent things that have been said so far. And the first is in relation to how do we continue to move projects forward beyond this funding. When I visited Hargeisa recently, I met with a lot of the project teams and sat them down and asked them what would be the minimum viable project that you would want, and what sort of money are we talking about? What things would you want to carry forward? And it struck me it was incredibly productive, and that what we could do is we could package up that information, and then we could actually share this around. Who's excited? Because often colleagues are looking for partners, but if we've got something ready-made that's also got a longitudinal dimension, so it's already got a track record, so that will really help boost these things with all the learning to just build forward and bring in the energy of others. And we could organize, I called it a speed dating session, where basically you have a quick run round of everyone talking to each other between project partners and potential other partners, and just see what comes out of that. So that's one in terms of how we might gain a new momentum. And then the other aspect of it is what I refer to as agents of legacy. So in other words, the participants themselves, the way that they are acting is a legacy, and the things that they're innovating are a legacy. And so actually just tracking what that legacy is would be incredibly valuable. To give you the one illustration that I had was when I visited the women informal traders from the minorities in the market. They just told me that, well, because we're now numerate, what we've done is we've set up a network of informal lenders. And so we now support each other in a way we never could before. And I thought, oh, wish I thought that idea. That's a great idea. And it's like, and so that's it. So in other words, we're worried about legacy. Well, we might not realize there's a legacy we don't know because we haven't asked and no one's told us. And so simply asking the question and staying in touch with each other, we might find amazing things. Give you one other example, it blew my mind, which is, so what the team that worked with in Radio Barawi in the Bravanese minority, I was absolutely blown away. He says, oh, maybe Fuad, I said, maybe I can introduce you to someone. I says, oh, all right, who's that? She says, my sister. I thought, I'd love to meet your sister. Sure. She says, because she's now the Minister for the Environment and Climate Change in the federal government. Right. Okay. And so we can also think that people aren't connected. in a way that, you know, I realized I've now got top level access that I didn't have before. So gathering in those things that we might lose, I just think it's already so rich, rather than us worried about big money, although that would be nice too. Right, thank you for your time. I hope you find that helpful.
That's incredibly helpful, Eric. And I think, you know, other people are appreciating your comments. So thank you so much. Right, we've got about 1 minute, 30 seconds left. So I'm going to ask Vinola, if you're there, could you just in 30 seconds, just respond to what you've heard and give us any thoughts you might have?
Yeah, thanks, Leon. I like the dating idea. Definitely like that idea. Yeah, I think we it's so amazing the past 3 days what we have seen that we have accomplished just amongst ourselves. And Eric is right that we need to tap into the legacy, the unintended and surprising and intended legacy that we've left out there. I think that we should own, because we worked hard for it, all of us together. And then but I think something more practical that I want to suggest is that we have a co-creation session on a funding proposal or proposals for the future that we can spread beyond the current network that we had, and I would be volunteer to be part of such a team. And then finally, I would just love to say thank you to all the amazing work and papers and the collaboration among the teams that didn't know each other. That was amazing and refreshing, and looking forward to more. And thank you to Rosie, Mickey, Leon, Rona, the team, Raphael. Thank you for carrying us through all the process with Camilla and Joe. Thank you, so amazing. The family is growing. Thank you, Injairu and Haila and Gamu for carrying us locally. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Vinola. Yeah, that's lovely. What a lovely way to finish this session.
Great. Thank you, Leon. We have come full circle now. We have our final 15 minutes together. And I want to introduce Haila again. As we started, we'll finish, to give 2-3 minutes of her daily reflections. We'll then have a closing song from Injairu. So thank you for joining us, Injairu. And then after that, I will hand back over to Leon to bring us to a full close. So that's what we are doing in the next 15. So over to you, Haila.
Thank you so much, Rosie, and thank you, everybody. Today has been as rich as the previous 2 days, and I haven't got the capacity to summarize it all. So I thought what I would do is I would just take a short minute to reflect on why we needed this conference and what we've been able to do in this conference as a whole. And, you know, I think in understanding ourselves as human beings and what we're capable of, is that we are capable actually of creating new forms of existence through the languages and through the things that we do, and especially the things that we can do together. And this is what makes us human, actually. And I think all of us understand that we have to create a new kind of humanity that embraces all of us and our planet. And I feel this program is working so beautifully at that part of being human. And I was just reading, you know, Fritjof Capra the other day, and he has this beautiful little piece here. He says that to be human is to be endowed with reflective consciousness. As we know how we know, we bring forth ourselves. And it feels to me that this is what we've been able to do in this particular conference, is to bring forth ourselves in the service of our planet and its people. So when we make these conversations as human beings, as we've been doing over these last 3 days in this conference, it's quite a complex choreography that occurs. And it's the choreography between the speakers and their bodies and their experiences, and the listeners and their bodies and their experiences. And there's a corresponding movement between the speaker and the listener. And I just want to, appreciate the synchronized sequences of these rhythmic movements that have occurred between us. But particularly, I want to appreciate Rosie and Mickey, because without Rosie and Mickey and the team that's worked around them, people that worked with them to bring this conference together, it would not have worked. We all know that. So I really wanted to just appreciate the two of you, especially, but also the team that have worked with you along to bring this event to us. I totally agree with Akpezi. It's long since I've sat for 3 days on an online conference and actually been there all the time. So the presentness of being present has been enabled by that beautiful choreography, Rosie. So thank you to you and Mickey and everybody else who's been part of it. So I think that's all that I really have to offer, Leon, at this point. It's an incredible process that we're busy with. We have another legacy conference, which is to speak not to each other, but to speak outwards. So we're going to have to think about what that conversation needs to look like. And I think we're very grateful that Rosie and her team will continue to work with us on doing that. So thank you to all of you, and thank you to Leon and Joe and Camilla and just the amazing team at Bristol as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Hala. And I'm going to give my final words before I hand to Njairu and then to Leon. When I started this process of planning the Legacy Conference, I was reading the background papers, and there was a phrase that stuck with me, which was relationship in action, and the definition was, how do we create the spaces and conditions that increase the likelihood of capacities emerging? And I feel that's something that the TESF network has done very, very well over the last 12 to 18 months. And then full loop, Hala's phrase from her tiny book has just been bouncing around in my head all day. Longing, belonging, transforming, doing, being. Our stories are both familiar and one of a kind. So I feel like they've bookend into this process for me for the Legacy Conference. And the other two purposes that we came together with was to celebrate your work. And I hope that you do feel celebrated, because you really are. So congratulations to everyone involved in the TESF network over the last couple of years. And the other purpose was to connect. And I do hope you feel connected, because you are part of something bigger. Although the funding may be finishing, the relationships in action will continue. So I hope that those two things were achieved under our time together. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Njairu, and Njairu is going to close us with song. And then we're going to hand to Leon to give the final words of closing. Thanks, Njairu.
Good people. Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, this incredible team. Yeah, lots of feelings for seeing all this come together. I just wanted to offer a song that is just a bit of a prayer in celebration of all that's been gathered. If you can just take a moment to just think about all the different faces, relationships, the conversations, the stories, the people who you have connected with through this project. And then also the possibility of the ripples that we're taking this work forward with. And the song is really about the heart of following through on this important work. So in honor of all of you, in honor of all of this work has done and is yet to do. I am ready, let my soul renew. I am worthy to carry this through. I am ready, let my soul renew. And I know I am worthy. I am ready, let my soul renew. And I am worthy to carry this through. I am ready, let my soul renew. Love, in all your incantations, Bestow on us your nations, the heart to follow through. In all your incantations, bestow on us your nations, the heart to follow through. To move. I am. To move. I am.
Thank you, Njiru. Over to you, Leon.
All right. Well, I don't know whether it's the beautiful singing or having been with you lovely people over the last 3 days, but I just feel very emotional at the moment. I feel really actually almost close to tears. It's been such an amazing few days, and thank you, Njiru, for that beautiful song, and Arundhati for your beautiful singing earlier on in the conference as well. And for the poetry, I think, you know, Kerry mentioned in the chat at one point that maybe our synthesis report should just be poetry and singing. So maybe that's right. But I just like to take this opportunity just to extend the appreciation that's been shown by the participants, Rosie, to you and Mickey, Luke and the team, because you've done an exceptional job. I mean, obviously we would have much preferred to be together in some ways, to share each other's company and to eat and laugh and spend time together physically. But I think what you've created here is really an exceptional example of how we can be together, feel that sense of togetherness in an online forum. Not an easy task, but one which I think you've accomplished exceptionally well. So I'd like to extend my deep gratitude to you and the team for your wonderful efforts in organizing this event, and really looking forward to the global event. Thank you. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank some others as well. I'd like to thank our leadership team and advisory group. I think you can see from the quality of the contributions today from the advisory group how much we've benefited from the rich expertise that we have. But to our wonderful leadership team that have helped to steer us through what have been quite turbulent times, from funding cuts to global pandemics. You know, we've survived and we've been through it together, and that's due to the cohesiveness, the leadership that you've been able to show us. And I think the projects have felt that love, you know, from our hub teams at a country level. Rona, Raphael and I have had the tremendous privilege of visiting the hubs, and we've really felt that. The support that you've been able to give, the nurturing love, attentiveness, as well as intellectual leadership that you've been able to give to the projects has been phenomenal and has really been, I think, at the heart of so much of that's been positive. But of course, you know, the projects themselves and the participants, what can I say? You know, I'm just continually blown away by the quality of the work that's come through, but also its significance, its importance. When we talk about legacy, we need to think about those informal traders that developed their numeracy skills. We need to think about the women who have benefited from the gender-based violence interventions. We need to think about the nomadic pastoralists that are developing new ways of working, the children who've learned new ways of appreciating their environment, the citizens of Garowe and other cities that have benefited from having all of these trees planted. These are really tangible, meaningful impacts. And, you know, I'm just delighted to be that we're now in a position where we can elevate these and take them forward onto a global scale. And we've had some really interesting ideas about how we can do that. So I'd also like to thank others as well. I'd really like to thank Ash Brockwell, who's been a consistent companion on our journey. Ash, we've learned so much from you about how to learn as a network through your guidance and your leadership of the MEL process. You and Raphael have really helped us to understand how we can use our learnings in a continuous way to develop. Thank you so much, Ash. And we're looking forward to your evaluation report. But also the Bristol team. And I think, you know, we've heard a lot today about Joe and Camilla. And I think, you know, if we wanted two names that could help us to crystallize why we've been able to operate so well as a network, it would be Joe and Camilla, because you've provided consistent support for all of us, often behind the scenes without any fanfare. But, you know, it's that hard work, you know, that has really helped us. I'd really like to thank other members of the Bristol team, Tara, Rona, Raphael. You know, you've been such a delight to work with over the last 3.5. None of this would have been possible without you as the close collaborators in Bristol. And you know, I think we've seen the fruits of so much of your inputs as well. So also, I think we need to thank our funders, the UKRI, you know, who have, you know, had to deal with the unprecedented funding cut situation, but have been there with us, you know, in trying to support us through it. And also, Catherine Flynn was there as well in the meeting yesterday and was very impressed by what's been going on. So I think they're looking to learn from projects such as TESF, but we appreciate the funding that we've received from them and the support from our various institutions, including the University of Bristol, which actually supported us financially in the context of the funding cuts. So that's to be appreciated too. But to finish again with a big thank you to the project's participants. It's your energy, your creativity, your songs, your poems, your stories, your determination to make a difference in the world that we have been able to learn from and benefit from so much over the last 3.5 years. Thank you so much. Okay, back to you, Rosie.
I'm done. With that, you can unmute yourself and say something into the space as we go. We head off onto our various days. Thank you, everyone. Please stay well. Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Leo.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah,
Thanks,
let's-
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you,
Wonderful
Bridget.
experience.
Love and kill you.
Thanks.
For now, see you in India.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Wonderful. All welcome.
I don't want to leave. I'm not leaving.
You want another 3 days, Rona?
Come visit again, Rona.
They're not going to kick us out. Let's just stay.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Rona. Thank you, Rosie.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you, Gamu. Thank you,
Thank you,
Poonam.
everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone.
Wonderful,
Mickey.
Ayla. That was so nice to listen to.
Ayla, Poonam, thank you. You've been
Thank
great.
you. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah.
And wish you good recovery. Take
Thank
good
you.
care of yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. See you.
Participatory research is, it's when I think about it, I think of something fun. So because the name says it's participatory, that means you're doing something. So I'm already thinking about something fun, something creative, and something engaging, because if it's participatory, then it means you're going to be talking with people, doing stuff with people. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
And is it always fun?
Not always fun. I know, Mika. No, interviewing me, it's not, I'm like talking to you, but anyway, it's not always fun. That's for sure. I mean, it takes a lot of time in terms of planning, money, and it's emotionally draining. Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Oh, okay. So you were asking me why participatory research is emotionally exhausting. For me, the fact that you have to deal with a lot of emotions yourself as a person, and the participants' emotions. And most of the times we hear stories that are sad, some of them are happy, some of them, they're surprising stories. So, the different kinds of stories bring a lot of different emotions, and you need to be able to balance those emotions that you experience when you hear the different stories. And oftentimes it's not easy.
So how do you deal with it?
Well, I think for me, right, I think I just deal with them instinctively. I just make a quick decision in terms of how do I address that particular situation at that time and move on to the next. But cognizant that I'm not a psychologist, which is why I'm saying it's emotionally exhausting, because I have to be quick in terms of being present and available in any kind of story that is being told. And that skill, I think, for me, it's not yet quite developed, because like I said, I think it's something for psychologists to do well. And I'm a researcher, and oftentimes when we're learning about how to do research, we're hardly taught about these things. So obviously there are difficulties when it comes to logistics and the planning of the participatory projects. And I mean, you could do a participatory project on a low budget, but you would need to do most of the work by yourself. So then that brings in the cost of doing participatory projects, because it's really expensive. I think for me, why I continue using participatory methods is because they bring satisfaction and fulfillment, particularly in the way how I relate with participants, right? Compared to traditional methods like interviews, where you've got the interviewee and the interviewer, and often there's that power relation that exists between the two. But in participatory methods, you as the facilitator, so now you're not the interviewer, you become the facilitator, you facilitate a process, and oftentimes it requires you to go to the level of the people that you're working with. And I find that fun, I find it interesting, and I find that there's a lot to learn from the people that I work with. You relate with people in a human way, in a way that I would relate with my grandmother, my father, my mother, my sister. And I mean also in terms of skills, right? My skills, they get better every time I use different methods. For example, it can be graffiti, it can be digital storytelling, it can be any form of art that I'm using. My skills are always refined, and for me that I appreciate a lot. Yeah, so the learning is continuous, right? Even for you as the facilitator. Yeah.
Shifting to a more sustainable diet has been recognized as one of the most significant actions that will shape all life on Earth. The Eat Lancet report highlights the urgent need for a transformation in our food systems if we are to support 10 billion people by 2050. But can we change from our fast food, high sugar and animal product diets that are so detrimental to us and our planet? We wanted to find out if change is possible or not.
I think when we eat, we don't look at where is the food coming from and how, and all those whys and hows and wheres and whatever. We don't look at that, we just take it on.
Through a number of interactive sessions, the participants discussed the latest science, heritage knowledge, what sustainable nutrition means, and challenged perceptions around food and climate. They tried out new and tasty foods and went home with recipes and ingredients to try and send feedback on.
I know that I can heal my body through food, through the good food that I'm eating. I can heal my body. I can live healthy and happy with the good nutrition that the information that the insights I've learned in Healing in the Pot research project. Now what I'm eating is not destroying the planet.
The carbon emissions that comes with keeping the livestock is contributing to the damage that we already have tremendously. So it's just easy to just go for plant-based because you are correcting quite a number of problems.
Today I'm making mushroom walnut and lentil bolognese deluxe version. I promise you this is gonna be nice.
I always thought that in order to get your proteins you have to consume meat. But now I know that I have a wider choice. I've got broccoli, I've got beans that I can get a lot of proteins from it than having meat. But now that I have gone through this session, I'm thinking a lot about that, and that's the reason why I decided to give up on meat and go straight on the vegetables diet.
Now, for some odd reason, I would look at how is it packaged? Is it plastic? Is it whatnot? Because it's hurting the environment.
it shocked us that some people, they eat dogs, and it makes me to think what differs from other animals. It's all the same. What we do is killing. I had to learn that animals and people are the same. They all feel the pain. They all feel depression, and we all have emotions. Knowing that information like really urged me to like take it out and teach more people to be aware of it, so that maybe they can make a difference as well. Even
mealies and bila are brought from a street trader from a Fakatini. So this is fresh. And then it's topped with chickweed, which tastes like mealies.
Now I'm cooking. I've got a business. They call me a plant-based queen of Impopomeli. With the wisdom that I'm getting from you, I'm just happy to be part of this community. You're so lovely, you're supportive to me. Like, I'm learning everything that I want to share with my community. I know this is a real food.